Why is it that sometimes heavy smokers will light a cigarette when they already have one lit? It's not because they want to smoke two at a time. Also, why is it that citric acid, the chemical that makes your teeth tingle, is added to toothpaste even though it does not help clean your teeth? To answer these questions, you need to know a bit about the topic we looked at last week, how habits work. For this reason, before answering these questions, I want to recap what we learnt last week. So what did we learn? We learned that habits are actions you start doing by thinking about but end up doing without really thinking. That roughly 40% of the actions you do each day are habits. That because habits take up such a large part of your time, they are hugely powerful, have the potential to do a lot of good, but also a lot of harm. We learned that school is a place where it's important to work hard, not just to get good qualifications, but also to develop good habits, and that good qualifications, while important, are not enough on their own. We also learned what habits are in terms of how the brain works. That when we start doing an action, the higher part of the brain that deals with complex thinking takes the lead. However, once you do it again and again, the automatic part of the brain starts to take over, and this is when the action becomes a habit. That eventually this automatic part of the brain decides when to start the action in the first place, although of course we're still aware we're doing it. Finally, we learned that all habits have three separate parts: the trigger, which gets to start the action itself, and finally the reward. Also, just as there are lots of different types of habit, there are also many different types of trigger. In fact, understanding that habit has these three parts helps us answer our earlier questions. For heavy smokers, smoking is of course a habit, so the automatic part of the brain decides when to start the action. This means when heavy smokers pick up and light a cigarette, they are quite literally not thinking about it. That is why smokers have been known to light a cigarette when they already have one lit. The reason why citric acid is added to toothpaste is because it provides a reward for brushing your teeth. This may seem silly until you think what it would be like to clean your teeth and not get this reward. It would just not be the same. Also, before this chemical was added to toothpaste, hardly anyone brushed their teeth, as without this reward, they could not turn it into a habit. So last week we looked at why habits were so important and how they worked. Today we're going to look at how we can use this knowledge to build good habits and get rid of bad ones. First, we're going to start by looking at how to build good habits. When you want to create a new habit, you have to first think about creating a clear trigger that will eventually lead the automatic part of the brain to start the action. For example, I know a man who has a strong habit of running and will often run 2 or 3 times a week, doing 10 or 15 miles at a time. However, when I met him, he didn't run at all. So how did he develop such a strong habit of running? Well, he started off by making himself go for a 10-minute run around the block each night just before he got ready for bed. Whatever the weather was like, and whether he felt like it or not, he would just put on his trainers and go out. At the time, he was not concerned about how far he ran or how fit he was getting. He was focusing on developing a habit of running. Whether he knew it or not, he was setting up a clear trigger for the action of running, the time just before bed, and the size of his trainers. Once he developed the habit of running, he just gradually increased the length of his runs. So if you want to establish a habit, you need to choose a trigger that will start the action. You also need to think about the reward for the action, as this will help motivate you. So for example, with someone trying to set up a habit of running, they would think about how the run makes them feel better, or how it's going to get them into better shape. We've looked at how setting up a clear trigger and thinking about reward can help us establish a habit like running. But you can also use the same approach with any habit you want to establish, for example, like doing your homework. The trigger you may use may be a time of day, maybe when you get back from school, or after a cup of tea at the weekend, or it could be something visual, like a folder you keep your homework in. You then need to think about the reward you get from doing your homework. You may think about how you're learning new things, or how by working your very best, you're making your parents or carers proud, or how you're working towards the best possible grades you're capable of getting, or how your work will lead to a future job that you enjoy, that pays you enough to live off well. By asking you to think about these things, I'm not telling you to dream about stuff that will never happen. I'm asking you to think about and work towards your future. You can use the same approach to be a better student in school. We all know what a good student does. They turn up on time, they listen when instructions are given, and they get on with their work. Poor students do none of those things. Of course, they're both extremes, with all people being somewhere in between, but much closer to the perfect student than the poor one. You may ask yourself the question, why are some students better than others? Some of you say, because that's just the way that some people are, but I don't think that's really true. You may say that good students make more of an effort than poor students, and there may be some truth in that. However, when I see good and poor students in class, I think that nearly all the time both students are just following their habits. The key between a good student and a poor student is that good students have developed good habits. For example, a good student may see their class book as a trigger for them to start working. The reward could be the feeling of learning something, or all the rewards we talked about earlier. By contrast, a poor student is yet to develop the habits of arriving on time, listening to instructions, and getting on with their work. We've looked at how you can establish habits in running, your homework, or being a good student at school, but you may decide you want to establish a good habit in something entirely different. It may be the way you treat or help other people, or the way you spend your time, or look after your health. Whatever your habit you want to establish, choose a trigger that will start off the process, then think about the reward you're getting from the action as a way of motivating yourself. Just because you understand how to start a good habit does not mean it's easy. Certainly to begin with, it can be really hard work. However, once you've established the habit, you should be able to keep it going without too much effort. You will also find that once you've set up one positive habit, that lots of others seem to follow without you really thinking about it. An example showing how this can happen is given by the case of Lisa Allen, who at the age of 34 was not in a great way. She smoked, she was unhealthily overweight, she was in debt, and she could not keep a job with the same company for longer than a year. However, in less than 5 years, she completely transformed herself. She no longer smoked, she was a healthy weight, in fact she ran marathons, she had cleared her debts and bought a house, she'd been working for the same company for more than 3 years, and was studying part-time for a degree. So what had led to this transformation? Well, after being dumped by her husband and having a very difficult time of it, she went on holiday to Egypt, where she saw the pyramids. Well, there she decided that she was going to come back in a year's time and trek through the desert. At the time, she had no idea of how she was going to do this, but one of the first things she did when she got home was give up smoking. She would need to be fit for the walking, and smoking was expensive, and she would need to save money to pay for the trip. Soon after that, she started going running as a way of getting in better shape. She then started to be more careful how she spent her money, as she was going to need to save up for the trip. Better habits of saving helped her clear her debts and work towards buying a house. She also started to be more careful how she spent her time, as she needed to keep her job, as well as fit in regular exercise. This helped her in her job, but also fitting in part-time study. You may think that's only one example, but this domino effect is quite common, where one positive change leads to another, and so on, and so on. In fact, there are 2 studies that show how this can work. In one study, people were given targets of how much money they were to save each week. In another study, they were encouraged to exercise regularly. It will not surprise you to know that after a month or so, each group had a habit in each of these areas. What may surprise you are the other things they also had in common. Both groups smoked less, they drank less, they consumed less caffeine and ate less junk food, as well as studied more. Nobody's really sure why it is that when people make one positive change in their lives, that lots of others seem to follow. Some people think it's because they build up their willpower. Once you get good at making yourself do something you don't really want to do at the time, like go for a run, because you know it's the right thing to do in the long term, then you'll get better doing the same thing in other areas, like toning down a glass of wine or doing an extra hour of homework. In many ways, it doesn't matter why this happens. What's important is that it does, and it's really worth making an effort to improve one habit, as this may lead to many other positive changes. So far, we've looked at how our understanding of habits can be used to build good habits. We're now going to look at how we can use this understanding to change bad habits. Now, much of the time when you do something regularly that you know is not good for you, you can simply stop doing it. For example, if after school each day you buy yourself a so-called energy drink, you could probably just not do it anymore without much effort. However, you may find you've developed a bad habit that despite making an effort to stop, you can't seem to. It may be that this is bad habits to do with your health. Unfortunately, at the moment, teenagers don't have healthy lifestyles. Some experts are worried that your generation will have shorter lives than your parents. Less than half of the teenagers get enough exercise. Only 20% eat enough fresh fruit and vegetables, and while 70% of you are healthy weight, 30% of you are not. It may be that you don't have any bad habits now, but develop them as you get older, as most adults don't have healthy lifestyles either. Out of 10 typical adults, only 1 has a healthy lifestyle. However, it may be that your bad habit you want to change has nothing to do with your health. It may be about the way you spend your time, or the way you speak to and treat other people. We know that when something becomes a habit, the lower automatic part of the brain does the action. What's also important to understand when looking at bad habits is the lower automatic part of the brain decides when to start the action in the first place. As I said before, this does not mean that you're not aware you're doing it, but you may have real difficulty in stopping yourself. The role of the automatic part of the brain in starting a habit was shown by an experiment where mice were put in cages with a lever they could press to get food. They were left to do this again and again and develop a strong habit, but then scientists poisoned the food. The odd thing was the mice kept on eating the food even though it made them ill. They knew the food was poisoned, as when it was just given to them on their own, they wouldn't touch it. However, pressing the lever and eating the food had become such a strong habit, started by the automatic part of the brain, they just couldn't seem to help themselves. This may seem like an odd and slightly cruel experiment. It doesn't tell you much about human habits, but it shouldn't take you long to realise that unfortunately it tells you huge amounts. Think about an alcoholic that is literally drinking themselves to death. They know another drink could kill them, but they can't seem to stop themselves. This is because the lower automatic part of the brain starts that action of drinking and they can't seem to override it. Alternatively, think of a gambler who's spending money they can't afford and is destroying relationships with friends and family but can't seem to stop themselves. Also, on a less dramatic level, think about people that are going to cut their lives short by smoking or eating badly but can't seem to stop themselves. When it comes to understanding bad habits, it's useful to think of habit as a form of learning. For example, I'm sure most of you can ride a bike. If you don't ride a bike for a few years or even 20 years, you'll still be able to get on a bike and ride it just fine. You can't unlearn to ride a bike. The automatic part of your brain knows how to do it, and it's not going to forget. Now that's great when it comes to riding a bike, but it's not so great when it comes to heavy drinking. The automatic part of an alcoholic's brain has learned to drink to excess, and it can't be unlearned. That's why they say once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic, and the only safe thing to do is not drink at all, as you won't be able to drink just a little bit like other people. Well, so far so depressing. But does our understanding of habits help us get rid of bad habits in a similar way that it helps set up good habits? The answer to that is yes, as what we can do is keep the bad habits trigger and reward, but just change the action itself. When I first heard this, the idea of keeping the same trigger and reward, but changing the action, it just didn't make any sense, so I want to give you an example. So an alcoholic wants to give up drinking starts off by trying to work out their reward for drinking. Why is it they drink? Well, that may seem obvious. They like the feeling of being drunk. But in fact that's not true. When alcoholics ask why they drink, many don't even mention the feeling of being drunk. Many don't like it at all. Instead they say things like, I drink to reduce my anxiety, to be able to let off steam, to be able to put my feet up and relax. Or they say things like, I drink to be with friends, to socialise, to be with other people, to feel part of a group. Once they've realised why they drink, they need to find another action instead of drinking that gives them the same reward. So for example, instead of drinking to reduce their anxiety, they call a counsellor to speak to about their problems. Or instead of seeing friends at the pub, they could go to a meeting of other people that were also trying to give up drinking. Alcoholics giving up drinking also have to work really hard to understand the trigger that starts them drinking in the first place. Is it, for example, a feeling of loneliness or boredom, or not being good enough? Or maybe they're trying to forget something painful that happened to them in their past. It's important to understand the trigger, as they can see when they're likely to start drinking, and make sure they do the other action instead. Now, I don't want to give the impression that for severe alcoholics, giving up drinking is simple and easy. It really isn't. It's a difficult and painful process that people often don't succeed the first time they try. Now, I hope none of you have drinking problems, but you may have other bad habits you would like to break, or maybe you feel have a habit that you don't want to stop altogether, but would like to cut down on how much you do it. Whatever your bad habit, you can use the same approach of keeping the trigger and reward, but changing the action. For example, you may feel you're spending too much time gaming. In fact, excessive use of computer games has been recognised as an addiction by some doctors, and while most people that play computer games don't have a problem, some clearly do. If you feel that gaming has become a bad habit, you may start off by looking at what your rewards are for gaming. What is it you really get from it? Again, it may seem like a silly question with the answer of, I just like playing computer games. But just as with alcoholics who really drink for other reasons, the same is true of gamers. Do you play because it gives you a sense of excitement? Or do you play as a means of escape or way of socialising with friends? Once you have found the underlying reason you game, you can try and find another action that gives you the same reward in another way. For example, if you get excitement from gaming, you may decide to get it instead by going to the local skate park. Or if you do it for escape, you can instead watch a film or read a book. Alternatively, if gaming is a time for you to socialise, you may instead choose to meet up with friends. You also need to think about what the trigger is for gaming. Is it just a time of day, for example when you get home from school, or is it a feeling that starts you playing, for example of boredom or loneliness? This will help you spot when you are most likely to start playing, and so you can make sure you do the alternative action instead. Of course, this is only one example, but it shows how an understanding of how habit works can be used to help you change your behaviour. And while gaming may not be a problem, if you're honest with yourself, you probably have some bad habits that you'd like to change. This approach of keeping the trigger and reward, but changing the action itself, often works, but it does not always work. For example, alcoholics are often able to give up drinking for a number of years, maybe even 5 or 10, but then a crisis comes along. It could be the loss of a job, or a divorce, or the death of a loved one. Now, some people under this pressure go back to their old bad habits, while others, although they find it difficult, still manage to stay away from drinking. And why is it that some people, when faced with a crisis, still manage while others start drinking again? When researchers asked this question, they heard the same response again and again. People talked about their religious faith. Does that mean that you'll only ever be able to give up bad habits if you believe in God? No, although it may help. What is really important is that you believe in your ability to change. Now, I know that you are sometimes told that you can do anything you want to, and I'm sorry to say that's not true for anyone. However, you should have faith in your ability to change for the better. So what have we learned? That habits are actions that you started off doing by thinking about them, but end up doing without really thinking, although you're still aware you're doing them. That is so much what you do is habits, they're very powerful and have the potential to do a huge amount of good as well as harm. That school is a place where it's important to work hard, not only to get good qualifications, but also to develop good habits. And that while qualifications are important on their own, they're not enough. We've also learned a little about how your brain works regarding habits. That once something becomes a habit, it is done by the lower automatic part of the brain, and that this lower automatic part of the brain also decides when to start the action. We've learned that all habits have three parts: the trigger that starts the action itself, and the reward for doing the action. That if you want to set up a good habit, you need to choose a trigger, and then think about the reward as a way of motivating yourself. Also, once you make a change in establishing one good habit, that you may have a domino effect with lots of others also following. That when it comes to getting rid of bad habits, you need to think of the action as a form of learning that you may not be able to unlearn. In these cases, you need to work out the reward for the action and then find something else that gives you the same reward, using a different action. Finally, to be successful in doing this, it's critical that you believe in your ability to change for the better. Thank you for listening. I hope you feel you've learned something useful. This talk is based on the book The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do and How to Change by Charles Duhigg. The talk is focused only on the first part of the book, looking at habits for individuals. The book has two further parts not covered in the talk, which are also really interesting. One looks at how habits work within organisations, particularly companies, while the other looks at habits of societies and the idea of free will. If you have time, I'd strongly recommend reading the book. It's successful while being very well researched. Even the first part contains lots of interesting material that I couldn't include due to limited time. For a full script and PowerPoints of the talk, please visit the Times Educational website and search the resources using Rufo Rufus. Thank you.